Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me along this evening. I hope that you're all battened down and avoiding Storm Kieran as it's approaching. Uh, so nothing like a little video just to sort of set the scene of what we're all about here at HM Coastguard. So over the next sort of 30 to 40 minutes or so, I'm just going to introduce who I am, really, where I've come from, how I got into working with the Coast Guard, who the Coast Guard actually are, what they do, where are they based, and where are we based, what it is we do, and how we work with other agencies around the country, United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. So I grew up in Birmingham, as far away from the sea as you can possibly imagine. Learned to sail through school and sail dinghies at both sort of national and local level, which then took me in the career path of becoming a dinghy instructor, starting my career with Rocky Water Sports down in Poole, and worked for them for a number of years in both Poole and in France, and progressed through the RYA training schemes, becoming an instructor and examiner in a number of different disciplines. So again, over the course of that work, it has meant that I've had the opportunity to come up to Caledonia and to Thrapston and down to Weymouth as well to support Sea Cadet training over the years. I then decided that a real job was necessary, so I ended up sort of doing a lot of commercial work with bigger powerboats and motor cruisers. I was a volunteer lifeboat crew for 16 years, and I also worked full-time for the RNLI for 10 years prior to joining the Coast Guard. So I joined the Coast Guard in 2018. I came across pretty much directly from working full-time for the RNLI, and went into a role within the training department based in Fareham down in Hampshire. I work with technical training, delivering a whole range of subjects to new entrant coastguards, from navigation to communications, search planning, as well as other core skills surrounding the maritime environment that the new entrant coastguards would need when they came in. So any new starters. I then took a promotion back just over 12 months ago now into maritime operations, where I'm now what's referred to as a network commander, where I look after the national picture of what the Coast Guard is doing. So who are the HM Coast Guard? I imagine that most of you, particularly those that are based in coastal areas, may have heard of them. I also recognise that a number of you that are based in inland locations may not be aware of the Coast Guard at all. So we are part of the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, which is an executive agency that's sponsored by the Department for Transport. So essentially, I'm a civil servant employed by the government, but to do a very specialist role. Within the MCA and the Coast Guard, we're responsible for the safety of everybody on a vessel in UK waters. We look after the safety of seafarers on UK flagged vessels, so any commercial seafarers, particularly on large SOLAS type vessels. We make sure the equipment on vessels is fit for purpose, and also ensure that documentation and certification is up to date and correct. We have a responsibility for the environmental safety of UK coast and its waters, and work with the Hydrographic Office on ensuring that data on the UK charting is correct. And we also then have responsibilities for our coastal rescue volunteers, hydrographic seafarer certification, and port state control inspection regime. More on that in a little while. But the primary responsibility for us at HM Coast Guard is that we're responsible for the initiation and coordination of all maritime search and rescue in the UK. So essentially, again, a fun fact to take away is under the Civil Contingencies Act of 2004, we are, I say fun fact, it is for me, we are the only nationalised Category 1 responder under that Act. So for us in the Coast Guard, we are an emergency service. We are an option when you dial 999. The Coast Guard is an option to ask for if you're in a life-threatening situation at sea or on the coast. We are very different to the police or the fire service in that respect, because we are national. That call can go to any of our ops rooms anywhere in the country, and a rescue or a safety aspect can be initialised from that. So to put a bit of context into that, I'll let you just give you a few moments to read that statement on the screen. Hopefully everybody can see it. So that is our declared statutory responsibility. What that means in very more simple terms, without all the words, is if we look at the picture on the right-hand side, the neatly mown lawn, anything that requires a search or a rescue generally falls to the remit of the police or the fire service. So the police have primacy for search within the UK, so they are responsible for that. Anything on the overgrown seaward side of that fence, that farmer's fence there, reaching far out to the horizon, is the area of the country that we look at. And sort of, I say the country, United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. So we have everything from the coastal paths, the cliffs, the beaches, into the surf line and out past the horizon in a lot of cases, where we are responsible and we are that first point of contact for anybody in difficulty or distress. In essence, we look after approximately just over 1 million nautical square miles of sea. So that image there, that shows what we have declared as our search and rescue region, so the UK's search and rescue region. And to the north, it's bound by Iceland, to the west, Canada and the USA, to the south, Portugal, Spain, France, and to the east, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, Denmark and Norway. Ireland, so Dublin, Valencia are the two primary coordination centres in Ireland, but as you see, Ireland has its own maritime, rescue coordination region, which sort of delves into ours. So we work quite closely with the Irish and the French, Belgians, and the Norwegians for a number of these reasons. Within the UK search and rescue region, what we have done is we split our region up into 35 operational coastal zones, that is, where the perceived workload of those zones determines the size of it. So for those of you that are up in the sort of outer reaches in the islands potentially of Stornoway, you are in the Outer Hebrides, sort of zones lovingly referred to as zones 35 and 36. As you can see, those zones are quite large, but the amount of activity and distress traffic expected in those zones is very small. Those of you that are based along the south coast or aware of the south coast can see that those zones are much, much smaller, with the Solent itself being an entire zone all by itself, just due to the volume of instant traffic that's expected to exist. All of those zones can be managed from anywhere in the country, with the exception of zone 25, which is what you can see far out to the left of that picture, which is what we refer to as long-range search and rescue. So that and anything coming in from externally around the world is what's managed through the long-range search and rescue team, which is a specialist function within one of two locations. So where are we based? So we are, from a maritime operations point of view, so from the receiving of distress traffic, receiving of 999 calls, we are based in 11 locations. We have one joint rescue coordination centre. So this is a term that's used internationally to recognise that there is coordination of more than just maritime activities within the location. So the Joint Rescue Coordination Centre for the UK is based in Fareham in Hampshire, in an industrial estate with a metal roof, so I can hear the rain in the background. But it's resilient and the additional support structures in place that we need to run the national service. We then have 9 MRCCs around the country, ranging from Shetland, Aberdeen, Humber, Dover, Falmouth, Milford Haven, Holyhead, Belfast and Stornoway. And we have one maritime rescue sub-centre, which is based in London. So London was set up off the back of an inquiry for a disaster on the Thames nearly 20 years ago now. And so where the inquiry found that the Coastguard should be with the Port of London authorities. So we set up a maritime sub-centre there. All in all, that comprises of 350-ish maritime staff. We tailor the staff levels based on workload. So as you can imagine, in our world, it gets much, much busier in the summer, particularly around the school holidays. And this time of year, the number of calls received does start to drop off a little bit, depending on what the weather is like and depending on what other activities and events are happening. We also have what's referred to as the Mission Control Centre. So this is a dedicated function. It's currently based at the JRCC. We are looking to move that bit of resilience elsewhere, and that's another international function that we as an organisation have. So anybody that has a personal locator beacon in their life jacket, any vessel that carries an EPIRB, any aircraft that carry a electronic location transmitter, so they're the aircraft distress signals, and anybody that's got a Garmin spot beacon or an iPhone 14 that has the satellite phone, satellite emergency calling, that mission control center is the dedicated single point of contact for all of those beacons to come in. And I can explain a bit more about that later on. In addition to our maritime rescue coordination centres, we also run coastal operations. So we have a number of Coastguard rescue teams based around the country, just shy of 300, with nearly over 3,000 volunteers involved. And they're managed by a team of around about 106 full-time Coastguard rescue officers. Also based in the JRCC, we have a staff of about 32 people, which is the Joint Rescue Coordination Centres, and they manage and coordinate any helicopter taskings or fixed-wing aircraft that we have. So currently, as you can see there, we have 10 helicopter bases around the country and across Scotland. And we also have a fixed wing base based up in Humberside, Airport Humberside. And we have unmanned aerial surveillance aircraft that is currently based at Lydd in Kent. But we are rolling out more drones across the over the next couple of years to support the search and rescue aspect of what we do. So, both the JRCC here in Fareham and our MRCCs around the rest of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland are staffed and structured in essentially the same way. They the numbers of staff will depend on the zones of operation, the additional functions that they work, and any other sort of extenuating reasons for it. So currently, we aim to have a team of 18 per watch down here at the JRCC, primarily because it provides a bigger supporting network to the wider country. And within the MRCCs, it generally is between 5 and 8 people per team. That allows teams to be on watch and also then to have sufficient numbers on watch, but also for any development training, local area visits, and leave, so people can take holidays. And we work 12-hour watches that start between. The earliest handover is at 06:30 or 18:30 in the evening, and the latest handover is 8 o'clock in the morning or 2000 at night, depending on where we are. So we stagger the handovers through those periods just for continuity reasons. Anybody that joins the maritime operations side would usually come in as a maritime operations officer. There's no requirement for there's no requirement for a maritime background because we can train all of that. Any maritime background that you already hold is helpful, but what we do ask within that is that people come in that have a good sense of team working, recognizing it is going to be sort of shift work, and that they are able to sort of record and take information quickly and accurately. We then do a 12-ish month development program with you whilst you're doing on-the-job training and doing courses within the sort of the training centre here at Fareham or on station as pre-arranged. until you become fully qualified within the role. Once you've been in the role for a short while, or for about 18 months to 2 years as qualified, you'll then get progression and training to move you towards a senior maritime operations officer. As you can see there, aeronautical officers come in at that second stripe grade from the off, and that's primarily because of the recognition that the skill sets that the aeronautical officers have, understanding civil aviation legalities, and they have a sort of a slightly higher appetite for risk. You can then progress towards team leader or in charge of the JRCC or the MRCC. So apologies, this slide, I haven't managed to update this slide. I was saying to Catherine there was bound to be one that hasn't. So my role is there as JRCC, MRCC commander. So I look after the national picture, and my role is to move the zones around depending on workload, depending on functionality and staffing numbers, and making sure that all of those core functions that we are required to do can be done. So what is it we do? Well, we do maritime operations. So we have dedicated officers that will be taking your 999 calls. They'll be answering routine calls from the members of the public. They will be issuing and broadcasting the maritime service information broadcasts. They will be doing a function called vessel traffic monitoring. So they'll be proactive or passively watching vessels for any infringements of the collision regulations, or if they are looking a little bit suspect in what they're up to, then we've got chains where they will get reported. We will also coordinate the rescues from the Maritime Operations Department. So we'll be speaking to lifeboats and aircraft and helicopters and other commercial shipping to ensure that what we need them to achieve is being achieved. We have the Coastal Rescue Service. So as I said in the earlier slide, we've got over 3,000 volunteers that are on the end of a pager. So should the need arise, they are paged and they are tasked to an incident. So it's an unpaid voluntary role, but there are opportunities within the Coastal Rescue Service for full-time employment within this, which I'll talk about when we get to those teams. We have the Air Rescue Coordination Centre. So they are looking after that fleet of helicopters and aircraft. The aircraft are under contract from different companies, and so the contract provides the fully crewed aircraft for what we need them to do. And we have this Mission Control Centre for the UK, which is the recipient of all beacons and alerts coming from those satellite-based devices. We have one operator dedicated to that per shift, and they work closely with other international organisations. So, for instance, if you're out in Australia with your personal locating beacon and you get into difficulty, and you set it off, our UK MCC will be aware that it's gone off, as will the Australian rescue services, and we will coordinate with them to make sure that they've got all the details about you that they need in order to effect the rescue for you. So, what do we actually do in the sort of during our shifts? Well, whatever we do as the Coast Guard is driven by the International Maritime Organization. So there are 10 functions that the IMO say that a Coast Guard has to be doing. Now, within the UK, 4 of them are dealt with by other organisations and other government departments. So, for instance, Border Force look after border control, DEFRA look after fisheries, Home Office are looking after any maritime law, enforcement, and any customs related issues fall to HM Revenue and Customs. So within HM Coastguard, we look after, as I've sort of alluded to already, we look after search and rescue. Somebody gets into difficulty at sea, we launch lifeboats, we send helicopters, we send Coast Guard rescue teams, and we look for them and we effect the rescue of them and get them back to where they are, back to a place of safety. We deal with pollution response, so we have a number of satellite feeds as well as reports coming in from members of the public for any pollution, any oils, palm oil particularly along the coastlines. And so we have a dedicated team that look after that pollution response and making sure that we have the right resources in place for that. Maritime safety, we work closely with partner agencies, particularly the Fire Service, particularly the RNLI, Royal National Lifeboat Institution, ensuring that the safety messages of what to do in an emergency at sea or what to do if you get into difficulty on the coastline are widely known and understood. But in addition to that, we then have the statutory responsibility where we work with the Met Office to issue weather warnings, routine broadcasts of weather information through VHF, medium frequency radio, and through Navtex for much longer range. So we have a responsibility to make sure that safety and weather information is known by all vessels within our search and rescue region. We look after maritime security. So again, we have liaison into various agencies, police, border force, and the MOD, where whilst we're not proactively dealing with any security issues, we're raising concerns and ensure and sort of acting in a observing role if requested by those organisations. And vessel traffic monitoring, again, we have a number of areas of interest around the coast. So the Minch Straits up in Scotland, very scenic part of the world. And the last thing we want is for a vessel to go aground and pollute the area. So we have systems that allow us to monitor vessels transiting through those areas. We have dedicated areas where we ask for maritime reports so we know what vessels are transiting through the area and not, and when they're expected to be clear. And we also manage the southwestbound lane of the traffic separation scheme in the Straits of Dover. So we have a dedicated team, a dedicated VTS team based in Dover, with Resilience soon to be in Falmouth to support that as well as the sunk traffic separation area off Harwich. We also have teams that deal with accident and disaster response. Very topical. That team is currently set up in a room just down the corridor from where I'm currently sat, and they'll be working with partner agencies and local resilience forums, ensuring that any support that we can offer out to the police, the fire service, or the ambulance service over the course of Storm Ciarán is done. But likewise, if we have our own accident, if we have a maritime disaster or a maritime accident, we also have teams that will then manage that, our response to that through counter pollution and salvage. So making sure the pollution response is dealt with, but forward looking for the recovery phase as well. So recap of where we are based for those, and just a few screen grabs of the systems that we've got. So we're working very digital environment now. So we have at any one time, an operator will have 5 screens. Five screens where they will have their communications tabs, where they have access to various phone lines and radio sites. They will have their incident screens, where they can see their resources that are committed, they can see where their incidents are based, and they can actually see what those incidents are. We have mapping tools, so we do use What3Words, we do use Google Maps, but we also have dedicated OS mapping provided to us, which allows us to put sort of some key features on and overlays. We have dedicated search planning software that allows us to plot and manage the drift and record the drift of objects that we might be looking for at sea, according to what the wind and the tides are doing at the time. And then we have our AIS and radar systems that allow us to sort of monitor those vessels. And that picture there is for the Dover Straits. Not much going on, not a particularly busy day. We're now going to look at the Coastguard Rescue Service, and whilst it's predominantly a volunteer-led service, there are 102-ish full-time officers. That number changes as people move roles or move into different departments. So our volunteers are based at a number of Coastguard Rescue Team locations around the coast. So depending on where you're living, as long as you live within about 20 minutes of a Coastguard Rescue base and they're looking for volunteers, you're eligible to volunteer as long as you meet the minimum criteria. Those volunteers are paged just like a lifeboat would be, and they are sent details and they will turn up and conduct rescues as required. The full-time officers, so we have senior coastal operations officers, the SCOOs, and we have area coastal operations officers, or the ACOCs. So our SCOOs, they are hands-on with the volunteer teams all the time. So I'll show you a map shortly of where they're all based. But the SCOOs will look after the welfare of the volunteers. They will look after the training and the certification of the volunteers, and they'll also deal with any challenges that might arise with those volunteer teams. They will also respond to incidents where multiple volunteer teams have been deployed, and they will then act as an officer in charge, and that liaison with the police, the fire, or the ambulance service, or all four. All of our teams, all of our Coastguard rescue teams are trained in search, so with land search. So very often they're out helping the police, particularly with searches in the coastal domain for missing or vulnerable people. They are trained with various search techniques dedicated to land search, and the training that we do is concurrent with what the police search teams deliver to their officers, and also what mountain rescue or lowland rescue go through. So when they're on scene searching, they're searching based on a joined up picture and everybody is using the same language. Some of those search officers, whether they're volunteer or full-time, are also trained in what's known as a Coastguard search advisor. So they have an oversight of the search, and that is to a similar level, and they're trained at the police college to be able to run and coordinate searches for missing people on land. We then have water rescue, so all teams are trained in water rescue. So this is for coastal environments where they can go and sort of enter water, effect a rescue if the conditions don't allow for a lifeboat to get in there, or the immediacy of that rescue outweighs the wait for another asset to arrive. Some of those water rescue trained volunteers are also trained flood technicians. So again, very topical with the weather currently, and they deployed to Scotland through Storm Babbitt, so that they can be on hand to support the fire service and other agencies with the rescue of people from homes and from cars. in the event of that, but without depleting the coastal resources that we have. And then we have specialist teams, and again, this will depend on location. So if you're an area with a lot of cliffs, your local teams will be trained in rope rescue, so the ability to rig rope access systems to deploy over the tops of cliffs and sort of steep ground to effect and recover people from rescue from the cliff tops or from the sides of cliffs. And we also have teams that are sort of have specialist equipment and specialist training to be able to kind of effect a rescue on mud and other soft surfaces such as sinking sand and quicksand. And so our teams are based geographically. They're split into a number of areas, 18 areas in total around the country. So within each of those areas, there'll be, dependent on the size, 3 or 4 full-time senior coastal officers with 1 area coastal officer looking after the and the sheer volume of teams within that. Again, depending on the perceived workload, will depend on how many teams are likely to be in an area. For the aeronautical side of things, this used to be run out of Kinloss. So the RAF used to have this function. They used to manage all of the aircraft, whether they were civilian or military. But in 2016, the military ended that contract and it became part of the Department for Transport and therefore HM Coastguard. They provide helicopter support to maritime incidents and inland. So they will work with the ambulance service for medical transfers where an ambulance isn't available or a helimed isn't practical. They will support mountain rescue with working in the Highlands of Scotland and within North Wales particularly, as well as being able to fly and support coastal and maritime rescue and search. All of our helicopters are available within 15 minutes by day and 45 minutes at night. So that's from the notification of the call coming in to them being wheels up off the ground and heading out. And the aircraft currently are under contract from a company called Bristow Aviation. We also then have a number of fixed-wing aircraft on standby, and these are primarily for counter-pollution, but they will also go and do search and rescue, so large search areas, which is impractical for a helicopter to cover due to its size. The fixed-wing aircraft do have a significantly longer endurance, so can stay in the area for much longer. But they also work with counter-pollution and also border force for surveillance and monitoring purposes. We've also got drone capability. As I said earlier on, we've got 1 currently at Lydd, and we're starting to roll out more as the sort of next couple of years roll by. Again, primarily for surveillance and the counter-pollution element of the work that they do. So where our aircraft are currently based. So as I said, we are the emergency service that deals with maritime and the coastal domain, but we don't do it on our own. We work very closely, as I said, when we were looking at the search and rescue region, the Irish Coastguard. But when I say the Irish Coast, we also work with other foreign MRCCs around the world, whether it be the Irish and the French that flank our region, or we're working with the Australians, the Americans, the Canadians, or anywhere else where there's a British interest with a search and rescue operation. We work with fire services around the UK, Northern Ireland and Scotland and Wales. I've put the Hampshire logo there just because I had it to hand at the time, but we work with multiple fire and rescue agencies. In fact, there is an MOU with all fire services that are coastally based for work within mud and cliff rescue. So they will support each other through those areas. And in London, the fireboat and also Merseyside, where there's fire and rescue maritime assets, are coordinated and can be tasked by the Coastguard themselves. We work with the ambulance service, so whether it be medivacs of people from remote islands due to helimed or ambulance provisional ferries not being able to run. But we also then work with the first responders, the paramedics and the heart teams that are arriving on scene. And if the casualty is in inaccessible location, then we'll work with those paramedics to get them to somewhere where they can be given definitive care and transported to hospital. The police forces around the country and across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Again, we share information, we support, as I said, with searching for missing and vulnerable people. And we also have that link there should there be a potential security concern to move on. The RNLI, again, all around the UK and Northern Ireland, we are their coordinating authority. We task them and request their launch to incidents in the maritime domain, but also then have close liaison with the lifeguards that are on the beaches. But there are also approximately 70 independent lifeboats that are also declared facilities that are available for us to task, coordinate, and utilise as required. National Coast Watch volunteers that are the eyes on the coast. They have set up, certainly in England, certainly in Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland don't have the National Coast Watch yet, but I know there are moves from the NCI to move into those locations. But they volunteer to watch the coast, looking out for non-radio distress traffic, and are a very useful asset to us in the ops rooms that don't have an immediate picture over what we're looking at. The MOD and other sort of agencies within that. So again, Ministry of Defence have always got vessels on the water. They can support what we're doing or what we need to do, as can other vessels that are out there. Royal Yachting Association, again, we work with them to help push that safety message out. We're making sure that the messages that we need, such as making sure beacons are registered, use of RWA safe tracks, are all sort of factored into the RWA training courses, so that anybody that does need help is sharing the right information with us. And we also work with the mountain rescue and lowland search and rescue teams around the UK, supporting them primarily with aircraft support should it be needed. But our Coastguard rescue volunteers can also go into areas to support their search efforts, and they will regularly come into our area, into the coastal domain, to help with ours. So outside of the Coastguard, there are a number of other departments within the MCA that might be of interest when thinking, where shall my career take me? So we have the Receiver of Wreck. They are responsible for any wreckage that washes up on the UK or any ships that sink within our search and rescue region. They are responsible for ensuring that the property goes back to its rightful owner. They're also responsible for any fishes royale, so any sort of large whales or dolphins that wash up on UK shorelines. They have the powers within there to ensure that it's dealt with in the appropriate way. We have the department that looks after counter pollution and salvage. So they are the first instance that if a large vessel is broken down, they can enact powers to enable that ship to take towage to a safe haven. They will enact powers to ensure that any pollution or disaster response to that incident is dealt with, and then they will manage the forward look side of things after that. We have a regulatory compliance and investigatory team, the RCIT. So this investigations team, they look after the sort of the legal side of what seafarers do. So should a powerboat crash into something and there's believed to be drink involved or some other law breaking going on, then they will work with the police, ensuring that the evidence is compiled. So they will then support the police with their investigation, making sure that all these sort of maritime aspects are captured within that sort of that prosecution or defence, depending on the circumstances. Survey and inspection. So we have a team. So there are a team within the MCA that are responsible for inspecting of new ships, inspecting or re-registered vessels that are sort of bought by new owners or leased by different companies. Any accidents or incidents that happen on board that have had an HM Coastguard involvement, it's likely that survey inspection will go down and inspect that ship, have a look at it, make sure that it is safe to go to sea. And if it's not, they will then impound that vessel, prevent it from going to sea, and are likely to have involved the RCIT team or the RCIT to actually go in file prosecution if required. We have seafarer standards and certification. So anybody that wants to work offshore, work on a commercial ship, the MCA look after UK seafarers, what standards they're trained to, and issue the certification, as well as conducting any oral exams for masters and officers of the watch. We also have the UK Beacon Registry. So again, it is a slight side. It is a bit of a function of the HM Coastguard, but any beacons that are personal locator beacons, EPIRBs or ELTs are registered. The UK registered vessels will go on the UK Beacon Registry. So we have a team that look after that. Channel 5, many of you might have seen it, have recently done a documentary on the Coast Guard and including some of those other roles.
Mayday relay. Mayday relay. Mayday relay.
Coast Guard Rescue.
I walked into some mud.
Okay.
In the mud.
We are the investigators of things that go wrong on the water, where there's been deaths, serious injuries, serious damage, serious pollution within UK territorial waters. We investigate that and, where appropriate, bring people to court to face justice.
Vessel has sunk extremely quickly. It had literally gone and vanished.
When I get the call, nerves kick in straight away because you don't know what incident you're going to go to.
The MCA use things that are used to monitor sea areas around.
Counter-pollution is an arm of the Coast Guard, of pollution, counter-pollution management.
We have a separate rule, and they must be compliant.
This lesson is not seaworthy.
we're always planning ahead with an incident just in case we have to go to plan B or plan C. We're always looking at other options.
We're the Coastguard. We're looking after you.
Okay, so the first series is available on Y5. There is a second series being put together as we speak. So well worth a watch to find out a bit more about what the different departments do. Let's say thank you for taking the time to listen to me this evening, and invite any questions anybody might have.
So we've got a few questions in the Q&A section. So if anybody has any more questions, please pop them in there. We do have one. How old do you need to be to enter the Coastguard or join the Coastguard?
So our to join as a Coastguard rescue volunteer, the minimum age is, I believe, 17. Because of the way the teams deploy, being able to drive is quite fundamental, because they have to get to the Coastguard rescue base and potentially have to drive the Coastguard rescue vehicle as well. For maritime operations, 18 is a sort of the minimum age, and that's primarily because you will be dealing with can be distressing phone calls, and so it's that duty of care that we want to make sure that we're not sort of subjecting too many young people to the types of call that you might have to take.
So we have, what is the difference between yourselves and the RNLI?
Great question. It's one that comes up all the time. So we are the government agency that is responsible for search and rescue in the UK. Our disposal, we have a number of resources to task. So we are the tasking authority. So the RNLI is a charity that delivers search and rescue assets. So they're all declared assets to us. So just like the independent lifeboats do as well, they sort of go through a declaration process to say, we want to be a rescue boat, we want to be a lifeboat. These are our skill sets. These are our operational capabilities. And so what we actually end up with is that we will have sort of a mixture of lifeboats from the RNLI and independents, where we will sort of just task the appropriate one based on the incident going on. So to give you sort of an example, within the Solent, there are, for every RNLI asset, there is an independent lifeboat as well. So there are, I think, between Selsey and Mudderford, there's something like 20 lifeboats available, half of which are from an independent. The difference, a lot of the difference is that like the RNLI will respond to pager call out, whereas a lot of the independents, particularly on weekends and bank holidays, will actually spend their time patrolling, but also be available for pager call outs as well. So we don't get to go out on the water as much from our role, but we task the people that do. Hopefully that answered that question.
Fantastic, thank you. We've got, is there an apprenticeship entry?
There isn't yet. It's something that has been looked at. The apprenticeship side of things, because all of the training is very bespoke to what we do. We actually looked at doing an internal apprenticeship, but we found that it was actually, because of the skill sets and behaviours required to join the service anyway, actually it was more beneficial for people to join directly as a direct entry move, and be qualified and there, rather than coming through an apprenticeship scheme on not the same salary, but they would be getting, they would get the same salary from day one as a direct entry maritime operations officer.
Fantastic. Perfect, thank you. We've also got a question regarding salary.
So
what would the starting salary be?
So Coastguard rescue officers, so the volunteers, is unpaid. They do get paid an allowance for when they're called out. And I'm not sure off the top of my head what that allowance is, but they've all got full-time jobs elsewhere. So you sign on when you're available and sign off when you're not. So some employers do let their volunteers go out during the working day. Others don't, it very much depends on the location and the type of work that you're doing, or that you volunteer when you're at home. But there is an allowance paid, and there's an allowance then paid for any training events you get sent to as well. For the roles within the MRCC or the ARCCs, the maritime operations officers, they start on an AO grade of the civil service pay scale. So the maritime operations officer is getting a salary of about £25,000 plus an allowance for night working and weekend allowances as well. So it takes the entry level salary up to about £30,000. The senior maritime operations officers and the air rescue coordination officers, their starting salaries are around about 27,000, plus they then get the allowances as well. So it's a it's for the work. It depends on the time of year. In the depths of winter, it can be a bit challenging to keep yourself entertained, but those are the times to go and do sort of development training and sort of work towards the next grading up. In the height of summer, it's very active, and you sort of go away each day very rewarded with what you've achieved through the day.
Amazing, thank you. I think that's it for our questions now, unless anybody has any last minute questions they want to pop in. We have a few that have said thank you very much for the webinar, and they found it really helpful. So definitely thank you to you, Tom, for joining us, and we very much appreciate your time this evening. Any other questions, people? I'll give you just a minute to pop any more questions in the chat. It doesn't look like it. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Tom. Again, we do really appreciate it, and hopefully that has given our cadets something to think about with their future careers and what they want to do with their time. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no,
and hopefully all of our cadets will keep an eye out on our social media and the portal for the next webinar. They are running all the way through till March, so keep your eye out. Every Wednesday we will have a webinar. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your night.